of those fudge pump. Hey everybody, how you doing? You folks say, oh, hello. I didn't see you there. I'm often asked,
do you read all the comics that you purchased?
fair question, I suppose. Today, it's very commonplace for comic books to drive cinema, but at one time, it was kind of the reverse. Cinema and television and literature, for that matter, drove what was in comic books. I was born in the mid-'60s. By the early 70s, when I began my schooling, comic books were really one of the only ways that you could go back and sort of relive movies or TV. You know, they didn't really have a rerun schedule because they were in the middle of making shows. If you missed it, you missed it. The only way to get more content was to go to comic books. Comic books are... Hang on a second, I better pay attention to this part. At one time in this country, comic books were blamed for juvenile delinquency. They were blamed for satanic problems and drug addiction and all sorts of other stuff. Comic books have had a very sordid history. So it's really interesting to me that they basically control popular culture right now. Comic books have really flipped the script on popular culture. Because back in the 1970s, it was a far different deal. The only thing that we did have that you could get was 8mm films, usually sold in like camera shops, and they would be like 12-minute condensments, often silent with subtitles. My first home copy of Star Wars was an 8mm black and white print. It's 12 minutes. Didn't have much on that reel. In the early 1970s, I made a friend in first grade, and hanging out at his house, of course we got into his toys, and we got into a comic book or two that they had at the house. I was familiar with comic books from that early age because my neighbors had all turned me on to them. But I was unfamiliar with what I was going to find at Robert's house, which was this book right here. This is a line of books called Classic Illustrated. It is from about the 1940s to the late 1960s that these were published. And this book right here made a huge impression on me because it was rather like a Cliff's Notes. Some of you are too young and won't remember Cliff's Notes, but basically it gave you a raw overview of the material in a book, and so you didn't really have to read it. Similar situation here, only it just more and more intrigued me about this story. And so I soon found that there was the radio broadcast in our school library on cassette, and I would sit there and listen to the radio broadcast, and I would pore over this comic book again and again and again at my friend Robert's house. And this led me then to about fourth grade, taking these books like this one from H.G. Wells, or say Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I would be checking these out from my school library and freaking out the librarian because she thought they were probably written a little over my head. And you know what? They probably were. But because I had already had an immersion in the material, I already had sort of some ideas in my head as to what this stuff looked like. It was a lot easier to read these books, though some of the language was antiquated and etc. And it got me to open my mind much quicker to other classics, which were in the modern horror and science fiction thing. So This is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It is another one that sort of rode with me, and I walked into the works of Robert Louis Stevenson. These books were intended to be a gateway, if you will, a gateway drug, a gateway book. There's the number one, by the way, Three Musketeers. This was meant as a gateway for people who were less literate and also less inclined to get into the classics. And I have only a few of them, but this one here almost, I feel, started it all. This is the one. In the 1970s, Marvel decided that it would try its hand at a similar thing. And so here's the number one that came out from Marvel when I was a kid in the 70s. And when I saw these books come on sale, I already knew what they were. So I started picking them up. And it led me, though it was some works that I was very familiar with already, like 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, it led me to other books. Gulliver's Travels. It led me to stuff that I would have to read for school later on down the line, like Tom Sawyer. It gave me yet another outlet for my horror obsession when I was a kid. It introduced me to stuff of a historical nature. And again, all of these classic stories are stuff that came up through my schooling. So when I was asked to read them as actual text, it didn't bother me at all. I already had an immersion in all of these books because of this comic book series. And I wanted to show you these because if you are out there and you have family that's not really into reading chapter books, it's what they call them here. If you have a family member who's not interested in reading as much, this is kind of maybe a good way to break them into it. By the way, this is the only misprint here that says that it was adapted from Jules Verne when it was actually H.G. Wells, I think. Food of the Gods, Moonstone, and you know, these books all came around in my life later on down the line. But I had, and this was immensely helpful because when I was in junior high, we had to go read the Iliad and the Odyssey and all of that stuff, and I already knew what was going on. Prisoner of Zenda, the Arabian Nights. These books were an excellent gateway for me, though. They absolutely opened my vistas. And so I would say that even though kids have a ton of streaming available and they've made movies and they've made television and everything else, what we really ultimately want is for our kids to be able to read as well as adapt from, video. They need to be able to go into the libraries and mine through history. And it can start with a comic book. Anyway, I just kind of wanted to talk about those books really quickly. It's been a sort of a presentation that I've wanted to make for a little while to talk about how comic books influenced me. I can't really do the same kind of journalistic presentation that other people on YouTube do, and I wouldn't try either. I mean, there are some great sources you can go to on this platform of ours where you'll get a much more in-depth history of artists and all that other stuff. I figure I'm just going to tell you about how these things affected me. Tell you some of my own stories. That's all I got for you here right now. Thank you very much for coming out. If you think about it, hit the subscribe button. If you don't think about it, then maybe you'll do it again later when you come back, because you're coming back, right? Anyway, thanks a lot, people. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.